female police officer steps into a dimly lit prison cell and addresses the inmate with composed professionalism. "You have precisely 3 months remaining before your execution," she informs him. "If there's any final request you'd like to make, now is the time to voice it. We'll attempt to accommodate it if possible." Rather than reacting with despair or desperation, the prisoner merely smiles, an unsettling expression of calm acceptance. "My last wish," he declares, "is to spend every night until my execution with a woman." The officer stiffens, her professional demeanor cracking momentarily. "That's out of the question," she replies sharply. "We can't possibly arrange for a woman to be brought here for such a purpose." Undeterred, the prisoner locks eyes with her and makes an audacious suggestion. "Then perhaps you could fulfill that role yourself." Her jaw tightens visibly as she struggles to maintain control. "I am a police officer," she states through clenched teeth, "not some means of entertainment for convicted criminals." Yet despite her clear refusal, the prisoner remains steadfast, his final wish unchanged. The question lingers. Did the officer ultimately concede to this shocking request? What transpired next is a story so extraordinary it will render you speechless. This account, remarkably, is based on actual events. Continue watching to discover the full story. And if you find this narrative compelling, remember to like, subscribe, and enable notifications so you won't miss future tales of similar intrigue. Now, let us delve deeper. The bleak, oppressive atmosphere of the detention cell was broken only by the intermittent flicker of the overhead light, casting shadows across Daniel's motionless form. Seated on his narrow cot, his back pressed against the damp concrete wall, he stared blankly into the void. The cell was nearly silent, save for the distant mechanical whir of ceiling fans and the occasional metallic clank of a guard's weapon. Though only 21 years old, Daniel's eyes betrayed a world weariness that belied his youth. A haunting maturity forged through suffering, remorse, and something more inscrutable. Meanwhile, in the police station above, Detective Clara moved with purposeful strides down the sterile corridor, a slim case file gripped in her hand. Tall, self-assured, and impeccably attired in her navy blue uniform, Clara had joined the police force less than a year prior, yet had already earned the admiration of her superiors. Known for her unshakable commitment to justice, ironclad discipline, and exceptional courage, she was the daughter of immigrants who had clawed her way up from a rough neighborhood through sheer determination. To her, criminal behavior was an unforgivable transgression, regardless of the perpetrator. This particular case, however, unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite define. Pausing outside the holding cell, she glanced at the name printed on the file. Daniel Malik, charged with the murder of his own mother. The brutal nature of the crime had sent shockwaves through the community, and the swiftness of the trial had left little room for doubt. The court's verdict had been unequivocal: death by execution. With a steadying breath, Detective Clara unlocked the cell door and stepped inside. The sound of her boots against the concrete floor echoed softly. Daniel turned his head slowly, his unnervingly tranquil gaze meeting hers. "Daniel," she began, her tone authoritative yet not unkind. "Your execution date has been confirmed for 2 months from now. As per standard procedure, you're permitted one final request. If there's anything you desire before that time arrives, inform me now. We'll evaluate its feasibility." A weighted silence followed. Then, to her astonishment, Daniel's lips curved into a smile, not one of mockery or anguish, but of eerie serenity. "My final wish?" he murmured. "Yes," Clara replied, already steeling herself for an emotionally charged plea. Daniel held her gaze unflinchingly. "I want to spend every remaining night until my execution with a virgin woman." The words struck the air like a physical blow. Clara's breath caught, her mind scrambling to process what she'd just heard. "That's entirely inappropriate," she snapped, her voice laced with barely restrained outrage. "You must realize we can't simply arrange for a woman to—" Before she could finish, Daniel interrupted with the same unsettling composure. "Then why don't you do it?" Clara's jaw clenched so tightly her teeth ached. "Excuse me?" she demanded, incredulity seeping into her tone. You asked what I wanted, Daniel replied evenly. I answered, you're a woman. Unmarried, I presume. And you're the one responsible for handling my request. If fulfilling my final wish truly matters, then what's stopping you? A flush of anger, not embarrassment, heated Clara's face. She opened her mouth, poised to unleash a scathing retort, but stopped herself at the last moment. This man was a convicted criminal, a condemned soul with nothing left to lose. Engaging further would serve no purpose. Yet as she turned to leave, his words lingered, planting seeds of a dilemma that would soon test the very foundations of her duty, morality, and humanity. Showing weakness before him wasn't an option. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. I'm an officer of the law, she stated icily, not some fantasy fulfillment for criminals. I see, Daniel replied with a slight nod. Then I'll wait. Perhaps the system will reconsider. Clara's eyes burned into him. Choose something else, something realistic. But Daniel merely reclined against the concrete wall, that same ghost of a smile playing on his lips. My choice stands. Clara spun on her heel and exited, her thoughts churning. She'd faced drug lords, rapists, armed robbers. Yet this man, this outrageous demand, unsettled her in ways she couldn't articulate. As the cell door clanged shut, she vowed never to humor his delusions again. Yet that evening, reviewing his case file under the sterile office lights, her gaze lingered on his photograph. A beat too long. The following days crawled by, each heavier than the last. Clara buried herself in paperwork, patrol logs, minor cases, anything to drown out the echo of that bizarre exchange. But Daniel's unsettling calm, his impossible request, kept intruding. Most haunting was his gaze, not lecherous, not defiant, but probing. A silent challenge that bordered on existential. Criminals typically begged, raged, or bargained. None had ever smiled while making a request so audacious it skirted madness. Near dusk one day, a distraught woman crashed through the station doors. Clara was cataloging burglary reports when the wailing pierced the air. The woman, 40-ish, clutching a shredded purse, collapsed at the front desk. Officer, my house. They took everything. My jewels, my savings, my husband's memorial watch. Clara sprang up, guiding the woman to a chair. Breathe, Auntie. Start from the beginning. After dispatching a squad car, she remained at her desk. The station emptied. Only she and Daniel remained. Outside, the sunset bled across the tiles in amber streaks. Restless, Clara found herself drifting toward the holding cells. Boredom? Morbid curiosity? She couldn't name what drew her there. He hadn't moved, back against the wall, knees bent. His smirk emerged as she approached. Starting to miss me? Don't flatter yourself, she snapped. Answer me. Do you feel no remorse? You killed your mother. Yet you sit there grinning like this is some joke. Daniel's expression shadowed, the smile thinning. Ever consider, he murmured, that maybe I didn't? Clara's brow furrowed. The evidence was airtight. Your mother, beaten to death. You, covered in blood, holding the weapon. You didn't even testify. I was catatonic, Daniel countered, voice fraying. She was my world. Heard her scream, ran to help. Someone had already. I grabbed a stick to defend her, but when I got there, the silence thickened. Something in his tremor felt genuine. Too genuine. But years on the force had calloused her against sob stories. Then why the silence? At trial? During interrogation? I shut down, he admitted. Maybe part of me wanted the needle. The space between them shifted. For a heartbeat, badges and charges dissolved. Just two souls in a concrete box. Her phone vibrated. The patrol update. The robbery was a setup. The victim's son had stolen her savings for gambling debts. Case closed. No arrests. Clara exhaled, tucking her phone away. Worlds built on lies, she muttered. Daniel's smile returned, wry. Now you're seeing clearly. That night, an official memo landed on her desk. Regional Prison Authority letterhead. All reasonable final requests for death row inmates must be accommodated within legal bounds. Her pulse stuttered. Dawn found her outside Daniel's cell with 2 steaming cups. He eyed the offering, then her. Since when do jailers bring tea? 2 months, she said, thrusting a cup through the bars. This changes nothing. He cradled the cup, took a deliberate sip. When their eyes met again, my wish hasn't changed. Clara stood frozen. You know, he mused, I've watched dozens of uniforms come and go, but you're different. You didn't see a monster, he said quietly. You saw a man. Clara stared at her boots, pulse hammering in her ears. That doesn't mean I believe you. No. Daniel rose slowly. But you haven't walked away either. She turned abruptly, her hurried footsteps echoing through the empty corridor. This wasn't right. None of it was. She was an officer, sworn to uphold justice, not to feel this unsettling pull toward a condemned killer, not to meet his gaze and see something that kept her awake at night. Yet in her apartment later, staring at the ceiling, his face haunted her. That eerie serenity, that fractured vulnerability, and beneath her ribs, something dangerous stirred, something she refused to name. Rain whispered against the precinct windows that night, a quiet percussion beneath distant thunder. The gathering storm mirrored the tempest within Clara. For days she'd battled this unwelcome empathy, this gravitational pull toward a man who should have been just another case file. But Daniel was different. There was a raw authenticity to him, a humanity so stark it threatened the armor she'd forged through years in uniform, the impenetrable shell required of a woman in this world of steel and protocol. In the locker room that evening, she stood before the mirror, finally out of uniform. Her dark hair cascaded freely for the first time in weeks. The cream sari with gold embroidery felt foreign against her skin. Elegant, traditional, utterly unlike her workaday self. No badge, no firearm, just Clara. When the clock tower struck midnight, her sandals clicked softly through the deserted station. The detention block lay empty, guards dispersed on night patrols. Only the storm's murmur accompanied her as she reached Daniel's cell. He was awake. When he saw her, not in uniform but in flowing silk, her hair loose, his breath caught, not with hunger, but with something like reverence. You came, he breathed. Clara said nothing. The cell door swung open. For a suspended moment, they simply existed. No titles, no handcuffs, just 2 souls in a space where time bent strangely. You asked for your final wish, she murmured, voice barely audible. I'm fulfilling it, not as your jailer, just as me. Daniel swallowed hard. I never thought. Neither did I, she admitted. That night, within those cold stone walls meant for endings, they defied every rule. They spoke through touch, through shared warmth, through the wordless understanding of 2 people who'd found light in the darkest of places. Afterward, seated side by side against the wall, they watched moonlight struggle through the barred window. No one's ever done anything like this, Daniel whispered. You really don't see a monster. Clara turned to him. Because you're not one. Then why did everyone else believe I was? Maybe, she said softly. No one else listened. So she listened. For hours, as Daniel unraveled the truth, returning home to his mother's screams, a shadow fleeing out back, blood soaking the floor. How he'd grabbed the stick in panic, how the villagers had arrived to see only a weapon and a body. His voice had failed him during interrogations, drowned by terror. The system had moved too fast, his court-appointed lawyer too slow. Clara's hands clenched. For the first time in her career, shame burned through her. Not for breaking protocol, but for realizing how broken the protocol was. At dawn, she marched into her superior's office demanding a reinvestigation. She filed motions, confronted judges, authored scathing reports. Let them whisper. Let them stare. She'd looked into the eyes of an innocent man. Weeks later, the case cracked open like an egg. Mismatched fingerprints on the murder weapon. A fugitive with a history of violence. A confession ripped from the real killer's throat. The gavel fell. Daniel walked free. Outside the courthouse at sunset, Clara waited in civilian clothes. No badge, no gun, just a tentative smile. He approached like someone stepping into sunlight after years underground. I don't know how to thank. Don't, she interrupted, taking his hand. Just live. 3 months later, before a small circle of trusted friends, they exchanged vows. She was older by 3 years. He'd once had death's shadow on his neck. None of it mattered. She had once been afraid to feel. Now they were both free. From their pasts, from fear, from the cruel hands of fate. Marriage had brought Clara and Daniel an unexpected peace. Not the flashy, cinematic kind, but something quieter. A companionship that ran deeper than words, an understanding forged in shared survival. Their modest apartment on the city's outskirts became a sanctuary. Daniel worked part-time at a legal aid center, helping former inmates rebuild their lives. Clara had transferred to internal affairs, stepping away from the streets that still carried echoes of his incarceration. On weekends, they bickered over couch placements and balcony gardens. Sometimes laughter came so easily it brought tears. Other nights, Clara would wake to find Daniel silhouetted by moonlight, prison's ghosts still clinging to him, but they were healing. Until the letter arrived. A plain envelope, no markings, slipped under their door on a Tuesday morning. Clara tore it open absently, then went stone still. You freed a murderer. I wasn't finished with him yet. The paper fluttered from her grip. Her training kicked in, scanning for prints, analyzing the sterile typed font. Nothing. Just those 9 words screaming up at her. Was it a threat? A taunt? Had someone been watching them? Or worse, had they imprisoned the wrong man all along? She debated telling Daniel. But when he walked in later, groceries in hand and a smile on his face, she couldn't bring herself to dim his light. Not yet. Dinner passed in tense silence until he finally set down his fork. Talk to me. The envelope slid across the table. His hands shook as he read it. You think it's him? Daniel's voice was barely audible. I don't know. Clara lied. The next week, she quietly pulled old case files, revisited forensic reports, even sat across from Kamar Ellis, the drifter who'd confessed to the murder, in his prison visiting room. People say I did it, he muttered. Pupils dilated. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. The days blur when you're always high. Ice flooded Clara's veins. That night, as thunder rattled the windows, she stared at the letter again. The words seemed to pulse. I wasn't finished with him yet. She checked the locks twice, watched Daniel's steady breathing in the dark, but the truth coiled in her gut like a live wire. This wasn't over, and whatever was coming would test not just her duty as an officer, but her heart as a woman who dared to love a condemned man. Stories like this have the power to heal, to open eyes and to spark change, but only if they're heard. Don't let this moment end with you. Share it now, and if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe so you never miss a story that could change a life. Be the reason someone feels seen today.